over. Oh, yeah, come the F on. Ugh. Better. I have to position my camera in an awkward spot the way I crop this because my cropping involves cornering myself. Anyway. All right, we're good. For some reason, I had set up the scheduled stream as a mobile, so it wasn't giving me a goddamn stream key because I was expecting it to come from my phone. I was like, you gotta be fucking with me, right? So I couldn't freaking switch the setting, so I had to set up a whole new fucking stream. So I don't know why. That's never happened before. And yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, sorry about that. So here we are. Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. I intend on giving this the same fucking treatment I have given everything else. I think after this I'll be fine with my baseline comprehension of the extreme left and their imagination about communism and perhaps reality, right? As I read through Che Guevara, I could find nothing with him, really. It was more revealing the deeper subtext of a conspiracy via bloodline than revealing anything that we all didn't basically know already, if you will. Granted, I think much of it must be downplayed. How the hell do you rationalize that to anybody wearing the shirt, right? And then Saul, though. Saul is not the kind of guy that I think... Saul didn't want to go violent, right? This is why he was more interested in teaching you how to, debase yourself. Granted, he wasn't ruling out violence. Means justifies an ends, and there's a human quality involved, right? If there's some real suffering. I saw on X yesterday a textbook example of Saul Alinsky-style tactics as a bunch of kids in protest of Home Depot were buying medial items and returning them over and over again in mass, hogging up the whole system of the store. That's the kind of thing that Saul likes to imagine is going to do this widespread collapse of a whole system unless they give in to your needs, right? And it doesn't matter how much damage or whatever is doing. It's making it happen with what you got, or however way he freaking phrased it. Right? But there's much more of an American patriot in Saul Alinsky, right? Perhaps a communist American. Perhaps, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know enough. I've read the book. That's my point. So, let's get through this. So there's your cover. Here's your forwarding slips here. Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. We don't talk about Engels as much. I will be taking a peek at Engels as necessary. This was published in New York, 1893 in English. So, New York Labor News Company, 64 East 4th Street, New York City. H.N. Hinman, Professor R.T. Eli. This is a list of his recommended socialist readings, and the price of each book you can see over here. 25 cents to $1.50, dollar, a nickel, 50 cents. So these are different books of different prices and such, right? This isn't even, this is all the publishing company right now. This is even Karl Marx, I don't think. Right, so this is like, we're just going over all of this. Lewis H. Morgan, Ancient Society, $4 fucking. You know, by the merit that it's $4 fucking, was anything else in here close to $4? No. A $4 fucking, like, that's an enormous fucking price for a book. Lewis H. Morgan, Ancient Society. Interesting. Okay. Remember that. Lewis H. Morgan, Ancient Society. I'm interested. Just because they put such a high mark on it. Alright, so there's 76 pages, but the preface starts on page 13. Right? This is going to be easy read. It's going to be very easy read. Probably a lot harder than Che Guevara's letter, but we've, you know, this is by far on the shorter side of things I've read for you. The Manifesto was published as the platform of the Communist League, a workmen's association first exclusively German. First exclusively German, you don't say. Later on, international and under the political conditions of the continent, before 1848, unavoidably a secret society. So they considered themselves a bit of a secret society up until 1848. All right? So at a Congress of the League held in London in November 1847, Marx and Engels were commissioned to prepare for publication a complete theoretical and practical party program drawn up in German. In January 1848, the manuscript was sent to the printer in London a few weeks before the French Revolution of February 24th. A French translation was brought out in Paris shortly before the insurrection of June 1848. The first English translation by Miss Helen Macfarlane appeared in George Julian Harney's Red Republican, London, 1850. A Danish and a Polish edition had also been published. The defeat of the Parisian insurrection of June 1848, the first great battle between proletariat and bourgeoisie, drove again into the background, for a time, the social and political aspirations of the European working class. Thenceforth, the struggle for supremacy was again, as it had been before the Revolution of February, solely between the different sections of the propertied class. The working class was reduced to a fight for political elbow room and to the position of extreme wing of the middle class radicals. Wherever independent proletarian movement continued to show signs of life, they were ruthlessly hunted down. Thus the Prussian police hunted out the Central Board of the Communist League, then located in Cologne. The members were arrested, and after 18 months' imprisonment, they were tried in October 1852. This celebrated Cologne Communist Trial lasted from October 4th till November 12th. 7 of the prisoners were sentenced to terms of imprisonment in a fortress, varying from 3 to 6 years. Immediately after the sentence, the League was formally dissolved by the remaining members. As to the Manifesto, it seemed thenceforth to be doomed to oblivion. When the European working class had recovered sufficient strength for another attack on the ruling class, the International Workingmen's Association sprang up. But this association, formed with the express aim of wielding into one body the whole militant proletariat of Europe and America, could not at once proclaim the principles laid down in the Manifesto. The International was bound to have a program broad enough to be acceptable to the English trade unions, to the followers of the Proudhon in France, Belgium, Italy, and Spain, and to the Lassallians. Lassalle, personally to us, always acknowledged himself to be a disciple of Marx, and as such, stood on the ground of the Manifesto, but in his public agitation, 1862-64, he did not go beyond demanding cooperative workshops supported by state credit. In Germany, Marx, who drew up this program to the satisfaction of all parties, entirely trusted to the intellectual development of the working class, which was sure to result from combined actions and mutual discussion. The very events and vicissitudes of the struggle against capital, the defeats even more than the victories, could not help bring home to men's minds the insufficiency of their various favorite nostrums in preparing the way for a more complete insight into the true conditions of working class emancipation. And Marx was right. The International, on its breaking up in 1874, left the workers quite different men from what it had found them in 1864. Proudhonism in France, Lassallianism in Germany were dying out, and even the conservative English trade unions, though most of them had long since severed their connection with the International, were gradually advancing towards that point at which last year at Swansea, their president could say in their name, "Continental socialism has lost its terrors for us." In fact, the principles of the Manifesto had made considerable headway among the working men of all countries. The Manifesto itself, thus, came to the forefront again. The German text had been since 1850 reprinted several times in Switzerland, England, and America. In 1872, it was translated into English in New York, where the translation was published in Woodhull and Claflin's Weekly. From the English version, a French one was made in Les Socialistes of New York. Since then, at least two more English translations, more or less mutilated, have been brought out in America, and one of them has been reprinted in England. The first Russian translation, made by Bakunin, was published at Herzen's colloquial office in Geneva about 1863. A second one by the heroic Vera Zasulich, also in Geneva, 1882. A new Danish edition is to be found in Social Demokratist Bibliothèque, Copenhagen, 1885. A fresh French translation in Les Socialistes, Paris, 1886. From this latter, a Spanish version was prepared and published in Madrid, 1886. German reprints are not to be counted. There have been 12 altogether at the least. Now, why aren't the German ones being counted? Interesting. An Armenian translation, which was to be published in Constantinople some months ago, did not see the light. I am told because the publisher was afraid of bringing out a book with the name of Marx on it, while the translator declined to call it his own production. Of further translations into other languages, I have heard but have not seen them. Thus, the history of the Manifesto reflects to a great extent the history of the modern working class movement. At present, it is undoubtedly the most widespread, the most international production of all socialist literature, the common platform acknowledged by millions of working men from Siberia to California. Yet, when it was written, we could not have called it a socialist manifesto. By socialists in 1847 were understood, on the one hand, the adherents of the various utopian systems Owenites in England, Fourierists in France, both of them already reduced to the position of mere sects and gradually dying out. On the other hand, the most multifarious social quacks, who by all manners of tinkering professed to redress without any danger to capital and profit all sorts of social grievances. In both cases, men outside the working class movement and looking rather to the educated class for support, whatever portions of the working class had become convinced of the insufficiency of mere political revolution and had proclaimed the necessity of a total social change. That portion then called itself communist. Hi, I thought you were going to talk about the substance movement. I am so sorry. Yes, there was a problem with. I have to fix that because my thing was set on my software here to go to the IP address that was set for the substance because I couldn't run the IP address test properly for this stream that I wanted to do. So I'm very sorry about that. I am not a communist, a socialist, or a leftist, but I am currently studying some of their literature and criticizing it in real time. You're welcome to stay. Anyway, in both cases, men outside the working class movement and looking rather to the educated class for support. Whatever portion of the working class had become convinced of the insufficiency of mere political revolutions and had proclaimed the necessity of a total social change, that portion then called itself communist. It was a crude, rough-hewn, purely instinctive sort of communism. Still, it touched the cardinal point and was powerful enough among the working class to produce the utopian communism in France of Cabet and Germany of Wakeling. Thus, socialism was, in 1847, a middle-class movement. Communism, a working-class movement. Socialism was on the continent, at least, respectable. Communism was the very opposite, and our notion from the very beginning was that the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the working class itself. There could be no doubt as to which of the two names we must take. Moreover, we have ever since been far from repudiating it. The Manifesto being our joint production, I consider myself bound to state that the fundamental propositions which form its nucleus belongs to Marx. That proposition is that in every historical epoch, the prevailing mode of economic production and exchange, and the social organization of necessarily following from it, from the basis upon which is built up, and from which alone can be explained. The political and intellectual history of that epoch, that consequently the whole history of mankind since the dissolution of primitive tribal society, holding land in common ownership, has been a history of class struggles, contests between exploiting and exploited, ruling and oppressed classes. That the history of these class struggles forms a series of evolution in which nowadays a stage has been reached where the exploited and the oppressed class, the proletariat, cannot attain its emancipation from the sway of the exploiting and ruling class, the bourgeois, without, at the same time and once and for all, emancipating society at large from all exploitation, oppression, class distinction, and class struggles. Right, which, you see, the problem is that we've seen nothing but tearing down something that could be worked to become available, thus also at a reduced cost to you, because of what happens when you let capitalism operate under the risk of manufacturing something at a cost, because you don't want to put the risk of manufacturing something at a cost on the government. Government subsidies on private companies promising green futures has been a fucking disaster for our budget with no fucking results that have made a dent in the market. People that believe in climate change also can't produce the tech that proves you can switch systems. They're pretending you can by pretending that you're getting the right getting the consistent wattage output from these nature reactionary systems, solar and wind, hydro maybe. And we're wary about nuclear. I suppose nuclear is safe. From what I've told is the true truth of radioactive material in its actual form. All right. This proposition, which in my opinion is destined to do for history what Darwin's theory has done for biology, we both of us had been gradually approaching for some years before 1845. How far I had independently progressed toward it is best shown by my condition of the working class in England. But when I again met Marx at Brussels in the spring of 1845, he had it already worked out and put it before me in terms almost as clear as those in which I have stated it here. From our joint preface to the German edition of 1872, I quote the following. However much the state of things may have altered during the last 25 years, the general principles laid down in the Manifesto are on the whole as correct today as ever. Here and there some details might be improved. The practical application of the principles will depend, as the Manifesto itself states everywhere and at all times, on the historical conditions for the time being existing, and for that reason no special stress is laid on the revolutionary measures proposed at the end of Section 2. That passage would, in many respects, be very differently worded today. In view of the gigantic strides of modern industry since 1848 and of the accompanying improved and extended organization of the working class, in view of the practical experience gained first in the February Revolution and then still more in the Paris Commune, where the proletariat for the first time held political power for 2 whole months. This program has in some details become antiquated. One thing especially was proved by the Commune v. that the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. See the Civil War in France, address of the General Council of the International Working Men's Association, London, True Love, 1871. Further, it is self-evident that the criticism of socialist literature is deficient in the relation to the present time because it comes down only to 1847. Also, that the remarks on the relation of the communists to the various opposition parties, although in principle still correct, yet in practice are antiquated because the political situation has been entirely changed. And the progress of history has swept from off the earth the greater portion of the political parties there enumerated. But then the Manifesto has become a historical document which we have no longer any right to alter. The present translation is by Mr. Samuel Moore, the translator of the greater portion of Marx's Capital. We have revised it, and I have added a few notes explanatory of historical allusions. Frederick Engels. London, January 30th, 1888. Okay, we're going to take an intermissionary break, and then after that we will get into the actual meat of the book. I'm going to screw around with Slavic metal because, you know, Russians and communism and all that fun stuff. So I'm kind of throwing a dart blind at the wall. That's too long. I gotta pick a well. No, I can't do a blind. I gotta look at the song's length. Make sure it's not too long. Let's see. All right, I don't know what Koduloits are, but we're gonna find out for 4 minutes. Alright. That was a little weird. That song. Because, like, the early part of that song was like. It was like a. Kind of like a heavy Depeche Mode kind of vibe. And then, like, halfway through it, it gets, like, gnarly. It gets gnarly and it gets, like, kind of like more like Immortal. So like Depeche Mode Immortal? Is that what that was going for? But anyway, how you guys doing? Let's get back in it. Okay. The Manifesto. All right, we're in. We're in. This is it. Are you excited? I hope not. A specter is haunting Europe. The specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Where are the oppositions that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties as well as against its reactionary adversaries? Two things result from this fact. One, communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be, in itself, a power. Two, it is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. To this end, the communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. 1. The bourgeois and the proletarians. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Free man and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition. The guild master and the journeyman? Isn't the guild master kind of like the guy that helps the journeyman get the skills? You see, there's always this resentment for, like, the guy from the upper class, whether he was born into it or earned it, or born down from it, where maybe his family was of higher status than he himself. He ended up finding himself in lower born circumstances, right? You know, this is part of the secret rituals from the ones that still practice the Bach Saga fertility order and play with those hierarchy games and the soul power in the genetics. But you know, it's that underlying principle, right? You know, like, so, like, one can say, like, any anarchist should all of these different things where they are actual. But the journeyman guild master relationship, that's kind of like saying the sorcerer and the apprentice. You know, you know, there's a reason why you don't jump ahead of the lessons. Now, if you think you're being held back, I mean, you know, this is like if you try to take over, like, a dojo, right? You know, can you take over sensei? Okay, here you are, and now you're mimicking what sensei did, but you don't know the moves like sensei did. And you don't understand why you're not as potent as he is now that you're just doing the thing where he was. Because you didn't earn it. You did not beat him in an honorable competition on the merits of the fighting art itself. You know, it's several things. But anyway. By bourgeois is meant the class of modern capitalists, owners of the means of social production and employers of wage labor. By proletariat, the class of modern wage laborers who, having no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor powers in order to live. That is, all written history. In 1847, the prehistory of society, the social organization existing previous to recorded history, was all but unknown. Right? No. So like here, like this is right up front, right? They're being right up front about it, right? Like it's all about the idea of you need money from me in order for me to have food and shelter and clothing and whatnot, right? And people hate that they only have food, because, dude, everybody who fucking fought in these revolutions, they all had a bed to go home to, right? It's just that they had to do the thing for money. Like I gave you the comparatives of socialist Cuba now versus colonial Cuba then. Their lives are worse, and they're working the same. Right? And nobody wants to blame the government. The government is alleging that it's broke. You see, that's the game, right? The government's hoarding all the resources because it doesn't know how to allocate resources without the principle, because the point is like, okay, now you have no companies taking risks. You have no companies in your country taking risks. And so you put all the resources in the hands of the only thing that cannot fail, which is the body politic of your nation. And it has to now hold responsibility. And it doesn't get to have the sexy bank loans that the other communist countries get. Right? This is why Cuba's in its unique situation. Basically, they thought that the mighty fucking Soviet Navy was going to fucking, just do the Cuban Missile Crisis every day just so they could get their shit. Right? So the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was a success, at least, for the United States in the sense that it really made trade difficult. And so, they didn't understand that they were navally surrounded by capitalists, by, Western civilization. And if you listen to my conversation with Bruce about South America, all those basic needs are truly met. The poor people don't have envy or greed in their heart in the aggregate. Only those that go criminal, that go a little too far, get that. Bruce will tell you personal stories on his podcast about it as humanity lessons, not as drama and shaming. So yeah. So selling their labor power in order to live. I mean, look, you're either going to sell your labor power in order to live, or you're going to use your labor power in order to live. In other way, one way or the other, energy has to be put into living. Living does not require no energy. Unless you just want to sit in a 10 by 10 room all fucking day like the pod people of Asia. That is all written history. So, right, there's no argument here about, the state of things. It's just your attitude and mindset about the state of things, right? Slavery is a microcosm of the communism they're looking for. military regiment is a microcosm of the communism. They already have their microcosm examples, right? And because things like that are your microcosm examples, they're also why they want to eliminate them, because they want to use the budgeting for that for them, right? We're living in a time where we want to resent the demonstration of material success. We're not going to stop living in the materium. So, I think that nations should have a healthy commercial competition that is a revenue that comes back into our wealth, you know, perhaps deflates the price of the dollar at the very least or something, right? The point is that we don't want colonial exploitation, right? I can appreciate seeing that argument from the Che Guevara material about the colonialism issue, because the capitalist who's in the country that the capital is coming from, right? It's a company from your country where, you know, things are according to your culture and your representation in the way things are in the world. All right. Since then, Hexthausen discovered common ownership of land in Russia. Maurer proved it to be the social foundation from which all Teutonic races started in history, and by village communities were found to be, or to have been, the primitive form of society everywhere from India to Ireland. The inner organization of the primitive communistic society was laid bare in its typical form by Morgan's crowning discovery of the true nature of the gens in its relation to the tribe. With the dissolution of these primeval communities, society begins to be differentiated into separate and finally antagonistic classes. We were always in different kinds of classes. We just never had an antagonism about it before, right? Like, back then, things were a lot simpler going around. Now we have more sophisticated and complicated social dynamics. And this was also a time where, you know, this period of the 1800s, spirituality was in a pretty dense fucking place. It was in a very dense fucking place. By and large, all the religious traditions were still unmixed, right? There wasn't a great amount of admixture coming in yet. Aquarius was barely getting started. You could say it started in the Renaissance and was moving forward through it, and that this is one of the many major steps, right? Either way, we're either just starting Aquarius or we're actually way more towards the end of it, and we're just seeing a dramatic change because of how much of the old world was falling away at the same time, right? We may have been surrounded by more derelict aesthetics in our world than we thought that we may have been, right? And if you think in terms of the resentment, it could be that these communists they might be very much responsible for all this destruction. That may be part of the secret here, right? That, communism, before it was legitimate, became an underlying thing for all sorts of destructions. Maybe. I'm coming up with that off the top of my head, with probably not going there, but let's continue to go through and see how these thoughts pan out. So all the Teutonic races. So I'm a Teutonic, right? I have Teutonic blood in me. Covered that by now. So, by village communities were found to be or to have been the primitive form of society everywhere from India to Ireland. The inner organization of this primitive communistic society was laid bare in its typical form by Morgan's crowning discovery of the true nature of the gens in relation to the tribe. With the dissolution of these primeval communities, I am sorry, did I read all that? I did. Antagonistic classes. Anyway, I have attempted to retrace this process of dissolution in Der Ursprung der Thiemelei des Privat Eigentums und des Staats, 2nd edition, Stuttgart, 1886. Guildmaster. That is a full member of a guild, a master within, not a head of a guild. Okay. To one another carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight that each time ended either in revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold graduation of social rank in ancient Rome. We have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guild masters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. Yes, because everybody's in different places in their life, man. An 18-year-old does not have seniority, experience, talent, work ethic, rigor, language skills, the whole 9 yards, to be the boss on a job site, man. And by the merit that you need all those things to be a competent and effective boss on the fucking job site, you get to be in a higher position. You have to have that space of separation. Yeah, it's real cute when you watch your benevolent leader, your benevolent dictator working side by side next to you in the field and in the war zone, right? And you're just seeing him as one of you, but that's just an illusion. You've given him the authority that you gave the capitalist. You just said, like, listen, democratically elect me as the guy running your company. And we'll make sure the whole country is the company, and because there will be no company, it'll just be the government running the resource, which makes us the company. But you're in the company, and as a part of the company, you get a fair share. And in their mind, this all works because they don't understand the broader scope of economics that all of this is about. Cuba is a barely self-sustaining autonomous zone that is doing worse for itself than North Korea. In the earlier, okay, I'm sorry. So like it's just my point that like human beings are going to have natural compulsions in the social stratum towards hierarchies, wolf packs, like wolf pack things, the pecking order among the women, yada yada yada. The modern bourgeois society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with class antagonisms. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of the old ones. The epoch of the bourgeois possesses, however, this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeois were developed. That's where I think you get the Burgermeisters, the Meisterburgers, which was a thing in it was in one of those old school holiday stop motion animations. I think he was in the Jack Frost one, which was like it was the lesser classic, but still a really good classic nonetheless. I'm pretty sure that was a whole Burl Ives thing too. I think Burl Ives did all that shit. All right. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers. Right, I'm sorry. Okay. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and in commodities generally gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, and an impulse never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. The feudal systems of industry, under which industrial production was monopolized by close guilds, now no longer sufficed for the growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guild masters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon, steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant modern industry, the place of the industrial middle class by industrial millionaires. Okay, but who among any of these lower classes wanted to could have done anything about it? Like, what are you complaining about? Yeah, they brought that to you. They brought an industry to you, right? You see, like, they're always assuming that, like this kind of shit, the reason why this shit goes out there is that there's some context happening in their time from all the newspapers you're reading, right? And, oh, it's horrible this, it's exploitation that, or whatever, or it's rumor mills or something, maybe because it's not the newspapers. Although I'm sure there's going to be also newspapers. I mean, you got all these publishers. The publishers are obviously operating whether the king would like to hear this kind of shit or not, which may or may not be a real risk. Don't know. And it's like things are not as bad as you assume that they are. Modern industries established the world's market, for which the discovery of America paved the way. The market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its turn, reacted on the extension of the industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, railways extended in the same proportion, the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, so, he's got his complaint about old money, right? Okay, fine, you got your complaint about old money, but you're not a conspiracy theorist. You're just complaining about old money. There's a difference between complaining about old money, which is just fucking greed and envy, and complaining about actual abuse and exploitation, right? I wonder who and how the people were that wanted a better life. Were they making a better life for themselves with what they got? Or were they just going to the pub for a drink every fucking night and killing themselves? See how that can work. Okay, let's take another one. So, what do I want to grab? Too long. All right. I can't pronounce this 3-minute and 33-second song, but we're going to go with it. Hey, all right, that was very cool. That was very cool. I wasn't sure what I was going at, and then when I got a real good look, I was like, oh, okay, it's gonna be folk-esque. Anyway, each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class, an oppressive class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self governing association in the medieval commune. Here, independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, there, taxable third estate of the monarchy, as in France. Afterwards, in the period of manufacture proper, serving either the semi feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and in fact, cornerstone of the great monarchies in general, the bourgeois has, at least since the establishment of the modern industry and of the world's markets, conquered for itself, in the modern representative state, exclusive political sway. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie, historically, has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. The commune was a name taken in France by the nascent towns even before they had conquered from their feudal lords and masters. Local self-government and political rights as the third estate. Generally speaking, for the economic development of the bourgeoisie, England is here taken as the typical country for its political development, France. Relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism in the icy water of egotistical calculation. So he doesn't like I get that. I don't like that either, right? This kind of like hard left-brained decision making. And to bring up the Philistine sentimentalism, that's a pretty well expressed statement in its time, and that's to be understood how much of an impact thinking of the Philistines there was. Okay, that it would be used in language in such a way. It had a reputation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation. Veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. All right, so free trade, which we're doing fair trade right now in the United States with the tariffs, right? Free trade would be if nobody had tariffs. So they think Trump is betraying people on this issue by saying that he's got all these high-ass tariffs. And I'm just like, well, free trade is about mutuality. We can't have free trade with somebody who's already tariffing us. We also have to tariff towards our interests. Right? This is why free trade is a good idea. But if you can't get everybody else to participate in free trade, then it's not going to work. Right? Communism doesn't work unless literally everybody agrees to it. And you're asking for a 100% tariff if you're going to globalize communism. You would have to install a 100% tariff for it to be as absolutely pure, which would force you to ask yourself how you're different than the World Economic Forum's ideals of no ownership. All right. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into the paid wage laborer. Okay, now there may be some significant grievance here, because we make the same grievances here in our day, right? You know, this is why I waited a long time to find a medical practitioner I could trust. I had to find a guy with the right practice, right? And and this is just one specific thing. I've got a chiropractor, acupuncture kind of guy. Maybe I suppose massage is in his wheelhouse. Right? And that's giving me something to work with that doesn't involve surgery and drugs, right? And that's something that has worked itself out in the system in America that we have now. My insurance, which is a state insurance, doesn't even cover this. I pay for it out of pocket. I'm not complaining at all. It's fine. But yeah, no, when you become like the paid wage laborer, now your money almost isn't good anymore there, even though it's the only thing you have to have in order for them to see you. But the beginning of the exploitation and the grifting, right? And we ask ourselves, are we even capable of being any different if we were to really try and change the culture around? And we did, and we failed, right? It required too much coercion, too much indirectness. There was not enough defensible arguments. A lot of people that didn't understand that we've had this argument already. We've settled this argument. It's a bad argument. You're not going to win. We just have to repeat it because obviously we forgot. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie, right? He could make more names out of all this, right? Like, he could say, like, you see what he did? Now, this system that this guy was in was implemented all over here, right? Because not every capitalist experience is like that. And it's just this very interesting time because you've got a existing power structure, your various kingdoms and empires and new republics and things, and all of them allow private enterprise of some kind, You know, many kingdoms allowed all sorts of people to get very, very wealthy, which in turn, they could spend their money to make other people very, very wealthy, etc., etc. Right? Uh, and you're supposed to, as a nation, bring in more and more and more of that to bring more and more ability for other people to get time in the workforce to to grow for themselves, right? It's fine if we want to sit there and say we don't want to have certain things that we're putting towards a workforce and we want to debate that. But these guys are acting like before we got into like these major like super kingdoms in the more modern times we're living in, that I don't know, there's just like there's always just too much missing in these mofos logic, and you can see it, which is why everything is just the bourgeois. It's all very, you can go ahead and name anybody a bourgeoisie, yada yada yada. So which is why we don't even use these terms, because like, okay, so like he's coined this term because it's explaining that you're the kind of person that made money, like the Burgermeisters and all that shit, right? So I guess it's about the robber barons and all that stuff. Okay, great, fair. But it's like saying the Jews. It doesn't fucking mean anything when you just say that, right? And these people are people that they'll sell you on the promise of like no, you're super cool futuristic science fiction world of all the awesomeness and everybody is happy, all the problems are solved, and everyone's really like, we got that. We got that answer. The joke is that everybody's got an answer for world peace. The reason why it's a joke is because everybody has to agree with it. Right? Everybody's little system. And you may think that your system has all that diversity in it and that it's misunderstood and yada, yada, yada. But yet, there's never an effort to demonstrate it. You get really angry because it's like when a flat earther tries to like show you, like they pour water on like a basketball and it just drips off the ball and they're just like, see, Earth can't be a ball. And it's just like, the ball is on Earth within the gravity field you're fucking trying to test. The density differences, there's no atmosphere around the ball. It's surrounded by the atmosphere here in the field of Earth that is affecting the whole test, right? And and like those aren't even like real flat earthers. But even the real flat earthers like will fucking ignore facts like that. I explored the flat earth thing for a while because of everything I felt were the major inconsistencies and discretions with the story that we're told. But unfortunately, there's too many problems with it and too many problems with the effing people in it. And we have a great deal of work to do in this world as we work in it. All right. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionists so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and the Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relation of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered forms was on the contrary the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes: constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation, distinguishing the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast, frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. What the hell is he talking about? It is? Could you illustrate that for us? What is all this that you're fucking going on about, right? This is one of those, what are you on about, man? Right? If you just heard this guy ranting at the pub somewhere, you'd just be like, what the fuck you on about? Right? Because he's trying to say that, so you're annoyed that the means of production keeps improving, and it's irritating you that, so scientific progress is very threatening to the serfdom. You've gotten your lower class people angry and terrified at this kind of stuff. So, yeah, okay. Like, doesn't this follow logic with what we have seen with what happens in communism and socialism? The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. Yeah, and communism did the same fucking thing, because communism needs to be actually everywhere. Capitalism doesn't actually have to be everywhere. Pepsi isn't everywhere. It's in so many goddamn places, it's insane, but it still isn't everywhere. Literally everywhere, but it's in all the big places, right? Serving all sorts of people that have come to like it, right? And that's getting into product brands and things like that. He's just, I mean, this is that too, but I mean, yeah, it's just talking about, yeah, he doesn't like how business is taking over what people do instead of living being what people do, right? And he is not looking at any of the benefits that becoming a society that works with industry and high skill. Like, it's a cool thing. Like, you know, I work in construction, and yeah, there's certain things you need to have qualifications to do. There's a lot of complicated equipment, and that's an ever-changing world, right? And now there's shit that's bullshit, like, you know, you gotta upgrade your goddamn operating system every fucking year. You know, like, you know, you don't, I mean, I've had this operating system for many years. It's probably time to fucking Get a new. I may need some new shit now, right? It's getting a bit stuffy in there, you know. Over time, your core hard drive is pretty small and eventually runs out of space because just how big your core programs get. All right, let's see. Constant revolutionizing of production. Sober in his conditions of life and his relation. Okay, so the need of a constantly expanding market for its products. So the bourgeois has, through its exploitation of the world's market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old, established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants satisfied by productions of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. Now, the corrupting facet of the material consumerist culture. I will not argue with Marx on that. Right? That being said, that's not necessarily what your experience of the existing market is. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations, and as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible. And from the numerous national and local literatures, there arises a world literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. Yes, that's perhaps a good thing. Perhaps. Depending on our context of civilization here, right? Because certainly there's the sad stripping of culture in bringing civilization to a culture. We keep acting like here. Stop having all of these customs and now have all of these customs, which will get you all hooked on our products. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations into civilization. The cheap prices of its commodity are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls. Okay. If the company is doing the colonial exploitation thing, if it's getting big government subsidies and things like that, yeah, it has this bullshit competitive edge on all the others. Right? And so these are the corruption of its time, deliberate suppression of competition out of these ideas in the markets that they so-called espoused, right? So, batters down all Chinese walls, with which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations on pain of extinction to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. So, I mean, like I tell you, whatever Marx intended, I mean, like, it's not like you became nothing but the industrial culture in communism, right? Just like with fascism, with socialism, you became nothing but the industrial culture of the workforce, right? Because you have no other fucking options. So it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent on the civilized ones, nations of peasants on nations of bourgeois. The East on the West. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population in the means of production and of property. It has agglomerated population, centralized means of production, and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequences of this was political centralization, independent or but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation with one government, one code of laws, one national class, interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. Hold on. Just want to see here. Okay. I think... How long have I been... 1 second. We have been... Yeah. Okay, let's take one more break. Because we're close to the end of the show. That's a good spot to pause. And... Alright, what am I going to grab now? Okay, here's another one I can't quite read. De Piatra by Negura Bunget, apparently. right, that was gnarly. That was gnarly. That was that had that real crunchy, bright fucking production that normally is not my favorite production type. But for that style, I thought it worked out pretty well. All right. All right, we're going to read a little bit further. And yeah, we're going to go about maybe 20, 25 minutes or so. All right. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam, navigation, railways, electric, telegraph, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? Okay, and so he's trying to speak poorly of the quote bourgeoisie, the class of people that are the people that own all the businesses, run all the businesses, right? We see then the means of production and of exchange on whose foundation the bourgeois built itself up were generated in feudal society. At a certain stage in the development of these means of production and of exchange, the conditions under which feudal society produced and exchanged the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the feudal relations of property became no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces. They became so many fetters they had to be burst asunder. Well, also all of these things were popping up by the kings pushing for it, for the needs of the kingdom, which were agreed upon by the higher families, right? That they're above the bourgeoisie, right? But the bourgeoisie is a class that exists in monarchies and republics, right? All the monarchies and republics, particularly in Western civilization. Into their place stepped free competition, accompanied by a social and political constitution adapted to it and by the economical and political sway of the bourgeois class. A similar movement is going on before our own eyes. Modern bourgeois society, with its relation of productions, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and of exchange, is like the sorcerer, who is no longer able to control the power of the netherworld, whom he has called up by his spells. For many a decade past, the history of industry and commerce is but the history of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeoisie and of its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crisis that by their periodical return put on its trial, each time more threateningly, the existence of the bourgeois society. In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products, but also of the previously created productive forces, is periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity, the epidemic of overproduction. So society suddenly finds itself put back into the state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of the bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of the bourgeois society and endanger the existence of bourgeois property. It's almost, I mean, it really does kind of play like a mental illness. It just sits there and it blames the government for making an economic condition for the rise of industrialists, the first billionaires of their time, if you will. Who then create a need for a labor force, right? So, like, there is all of this. There's a lot of bullshit to the separating people from their land kind of thing, and it's just like, you got to have a healthy education precede things first, and you have to not be interested in tearing a person from their land, but my answers, my approaches to things comes from an anarchist perspective. So I'm not interested in talking about how you put propaganda into the education to make sure that you're getting something that serves the nation out of it, right? I think that we have to ask ourselves, there's a lot of things we have to ask ourselves. I mean, end of the day, the voluntarist society, right? Because you hate how things can be forced, right? Now, instead of having had society seize all the means of production by these grievances, really, you just needed to stand on your right for your own means of production. I have a small garden in my backyard. Big weed didn't stop me from growing my own pot. Okay? Where was I? The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to compromise the wealth created by them, and on one hand, they have productive forces. So anyway, the weapons with which the bourgeois felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. In proposition as the bourgeoisie, capital is developed in the same proportion is the proletariat, the modern working class, developed a class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations of the market. You are also a commodity to the king before there was a bourgeoisie. And the bourgeoisie theoretically doesn't have the right to do what the king can do to you, like force you to go to war, or, I don't know, order you killed or whatever. I mean, he hasn't even gotten there yet, right? Like, all of this, and, you know, he hasn't even talked about, like, even corruption. He's just talking about the system as it is. Like, how do you do this without talking about the corruption? I mean, I suppose he theoretically is, because of how he complains about the relationships between the bourgeois. But it's leaving your mind kind of swimming in a sea of the superficial face value of it, which is exactly what we're always hearing, right? It's just an appeal for a certain worldview, so that way the people that do not believe in themselves can enjoy their meaningless lives. So anyway, I qualify as a proletarian. Owing the extensive use of machinery and to division of labor, the work of the proletarian has lost all individual character and consequently all charm for the workman. It becomes an appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most monotonous, and most easily acquired knack that is required of him. Once again, every socialist and communist country is not only in the same circumstances, but in worse, because everybody is just a low cog in a machine. And thus there are no high cogs. And thus there are no cogs that are best for the design of the machine. And thus the machine sits at a subsistent design. Hence, the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. But the price of a commodity, and therefore also a labor, is equal to its cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay, more in proportion as the use of machinery and division of labor increases, in the same proportion the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, by increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by increased speed of the machinery, etc. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of the patriarchal masters into the great factory of the industrial capitalist. Masses of laborers crowded into the factory are organized like soldiers. As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under the command of a perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeois class and of the bourgeois state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, and above all, by the individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. The more openly this despotism proclaims gain to be its end and aim, the more petty, the more hateful, the more embittering it is. The less skill and exertion of strength is implied in manual labor. In other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more is the labor of the men superseded by that of women. Oh, what is this? The less skill and exertion of strength is implied in manual labor. In other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more is the labor of men superseded by that of women. Oh, the horrors that now there are places to work that women can work. Oh no, who will sew my things? Oh no. Right, it's this thing. It's okay. We've been at it for several hundred years now. Somebody is still sewing the things. We'll be all right. We'll be all right. Ah, good. Just a little bit of Marxist sexism for you. There you go. There you go. It works. See, it always works. Differences of age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All are instruments of labor, more or less expensive to use according to age and sex. No sooner is the exploitation of labor by the manufacturer so far at end that he receives his wages in cash than he is set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. Excuse me. The lower strata of the middle class, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, and retired tradesmen. Generally, the handicraftsmen, the peasants, all these sink gradually into the proletariat, partly because their diminutive capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern industry is carried on and is swamped in the competition with the large capitalists, partly because their specialized skill is rendered worthless by new methods of production. Thus, the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. Right, sure. Who's recruiting the proletariat? I don't mean like not the bourgeois. Who? Who's recruiting them? Right? Somebody said, you have permission to take my people and make them proletariats. Was that the king? Was that the mayor? Who makes that call? The proletariat goes through various stages of development. With its birth begins its struggle with bourgeoisie. At first, the contest is carried on by individual laborers, then by the work people of a factory, then by the operative of one trade and one loyalty against the individual bourgeois who directly exploits them. So wait. We go straight from you're born struggling with the bourgeoisie to now you're an individual laborer. That's like the life of Christ, man. And so Jesus was born, they hunted him like a dog until he hid in Egypt, and then he was a grown man and got baptized and began his ministry. It's the same fucking gap in the resume, dude. Where the fuck was your entire life? You want to explain this guy's entire struggle with the bourgeoisie as a kid? Or is it too embarrassing to see all the laughter of the children? Like, what the fuck is this struggle you're talking about? Right? This is lazy writing. You know, this is not timeless writing, right? It isn't timeless at all. You're just imagining it. You know, you're taking like one example and saying like, oh, I can make a model that will never have bad examples of itself. And then we get a bunch of bad examples of itself, and we want to have a revolution because we think that there's more bad examples on our side. I get it. You're itching for the world to change. So am I. But you are reaching for the mistakes of the past instead of just simply making something new today that works in whatever terms. All right, so the proletariat goes through various stages, right? Okay, worker factory. Then by the operatives of one trade in one locality against the individual bourgeois who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeois conditions of production, but against the instruments of production themselves. They destroy imported wares that compete with their labor. They smash to pieces of machinery. They set factories ablaze. They seek to restore by force the vanished status of the workmen of the Middle Ages. At this stage, laborers still form an incoherent mass scattered over the whole country and broken up by their mutual competition. If anywhere they unite to form more compact bodies, this is not yet the consequence of their own active union, but of the union of the bourgeoisie, which class, in order to attain its own political ends, is compelled to set the whole proletariat in motion, and is moreover yet for a time able to do so. At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not fight their enemies, but the enemies of their enemies, the remnants of absolute monarchy, the landowners, the non-industrial bourgeois, the petty bourgeois. The whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeois. Every victory so obtained is a victory for the bourgeois. But with the development of industry, the proletariat not only increases in number, it becomes concentrated in greater masses. Its strength grows, and it feels that strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized in proportion. Its machinery obliterates all distinctions of labor and nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level. The growing competition among the bourgeois and the resulting commercial crisis make the wages of the workers ever more fluctuating. The unceasing improvement of machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihoods more and more precarious. The collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeois take more and more the character of collisions between two classes. Thereupon, the workers begin to form combinations, trades unions, against the bourgeois. They club together in order to keep up the rates of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provisions beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. Okay, we're going to call it right here for today. So that's 25 out of these 76. So, I think maybe we're about a third of the way through it, per se. All right. Thanks so much, guys. I'm going to fix my my thing for the substance, and I will see you tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to go live earlier in the afternoon and do another chapter of this or anything else. But I will see you at 6 p.m. for The Substance with Abby Ramsey and Madia West. You guys have a good night.